Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another exciting video on this YouTube channel here today. This is the best Swift development channel on youtube.com. In today's lesson, what I would like to do here is to quickly showcase a set of tools that I use when I develop applications for clients and also a bunch of internal projects that I use on a daily basis. And basically, this set of tools is called LBTATools. It's a framework that I put on CocoaPods myself, and you're free to use it however you please. And basically, the whole point of this framework here that I wrote down is to help us create screens and UI very, very quickly by just using a couple of classes inside of our iOS applications. Now, before I dive into any type of code here, I would like to go over what this screen is made up of in terms of its components. And what you can see right off the bat here is that we have a vertical list of repeating cells all the way at the bottom. So for example, we have Wind, Water, and Kelly. These are the repeating cells inside of our vertical list. You can tap into any of these cells and it'll take you into the message log just like so. Now, another very common pattern is to have a header up here that you can scroll horizontally left and right. And if there were more cells on the right side here, you should be able to see those as you scroll to the left side. So pretty common and pretty typical pattern like I was mentioning earlier. Now, if you build out this screen before, you'll notice that there's a lot of boilerplate code that you have to include inside of your view controllers. And in the end of the day, you might end up with a massive view controller, which is always something that you want to avoid. And so in using LBTATools, it's actually very, very easy to build out a screen just like this. And I'll show you how to do that right now inside of Xcode. All right, everybody, welcome back to the coding session for today's video. Let's go ahead and get started with some coding inside of Xcode right now. What you're seeing on the left side of the screen is a brand new Xcode project that I'll run inside the iPhone XS simulator right over here. So we have a white background with a nav bar up at the very top. The reason why we're seeing the nav bar is because inside of our app delegate, we have window.root view controller as the navigation controller containing our view controller file right here. Now, I already gone ahead and installed the LBTATools framework. That's kind of why we have these pods down here and over here as well. If you want to learn how to install a pod, you want to go to this repository right over here, LBTATools, and just scroll down to the very bottom. You just want to do all of the necessary steps to set up a CocoaPod inside of your project, which I won't be going over how to install because it's a pretty easy process and there's already 1,000 videos on the internet on how to do that. Okay, so with all that being said, let's go ahead and start with what exactly we want to do with the LBTATools framework so that we can achieve this look and feel inside of this application here. And like I was mentioning earlier, it's actually really, really simple. You just want to create some kind of vertical list down here with a bunch of repeating cells, and then we'll create this header guy up at the very top as well. So let's get started by removing this view controller file here, and I'm going to create a brand new class. I'm going to call this the messages controller. So this is going to represent all the messages inside of this view here. And the tricky part is to establish what is the superclass for this messages controller. So I'm going to try to subclass something called a list controller that represents just a simple list. And we can't do that yet until we import the LBTATools. And let me just finish typing here. We have list controller and list header controller. Let me use this one first because it's a little easier to explain what the heck is going on. So LBTAListController, this guy requires you to pass in two generics. One is T and one is U. Now this T right here represents the cell class that the actual list controller is going to render out. So for example, one of these cells here. And then the U just represents what the actual cell is rendering out. So it might sound a little bit confusing, but once you see the code, it's actually pretty straightforward. So let's first declare what T is going to be. I'm going to call this a brand new class, and I'm going to use message cell like so, and this will be a LBTA list cell, just like that. And this guy also requires a generic itself. And so this generic over here is going to be the same generic U that you establish here. So basically a list inside of your, or a cell inside of your list is pretty much responsible for drawing something out, right? So for example, we have the image view, the wind, and then the message text right here. And that's pretty basic. This U right here, I'm going to establish as just a UI color for now. I'll modify this to be a message later, but this is easy to explain what exactly this little generic is going to be used for, because when I establish the UI color here, I'm going to override this item variable, and as you can see, it is UI colored. So you can double click on that. If you modify this guy to be something else like a string right here, the item is going to be of type string. Okay, so that's how the generic works in this list cell class. And let me just use UI color and say did set here and override the observer of did set background color to this actual item here. All right, so that's pretty much all this cell is going to contain. Just modifies the background color to whatever this item is going to be. And now that I have this cell, I just want to replace this T right here with the message cell. And then the U is this UI color there. Now, very similar to this item here, the messages controller also has this items array that contains the items that's represented by this generic here. So you can see it's an array of UI color objects just like that. And what you want to do is you want to override viewed@load, just like what you would do in pretty much any view controller class, right? And all that's pretty much left is to set some items inside of your array. So for example, we have 3 messages here, right? Wind, water, and Kelly. And here I'll just declare .red, .blue, and .yellow. This items is just going to contain 3 objects inside of it right now. And you can't run your application just yet because we removed our view controller. So let's go back to app delegate, replace it with the messages controller, and everything looks pretty good to go here. And as you can quickly see, we have 3 cells, the red, the blue, and the yellow, pretty much represented by whatever is inside of your items array. So, you can just type whatever colors you want inside of here. This pretty much takes care of a lot of different methods for a UI collection view controller. So for example, things we want to avoid is the collection view.register process, or register the cell class. And then we also want to avoid number of items in section and cell for item at index path. So just using this list controller right here, we avoided all of this junk and the cell ID that's very tedious to deal with. So I do recommend that you try to use this list controller anywhere that you can. Now, in order to make our cells expand fully to the left and right, we still have to conform to UI collection view delegate flow layout, which provides us with size for item at return. This guy expects a CG size, so let's just say view, frame, and width. So this stuff is still the good old UI kit framework code. And once you do this, you'll see that your cells will expand fully left and right. Okay, now I'm going to use items, and let's see, not item, but navigation item.title equals, let's give this guy a messages title up at the very top there. And let's kind of see what this renders out, and then we'll move on to the next thing that we want to do. So here we go, messages up there, looks good. And now what you really want to do is to start rendering out these messages cell right here. So we have an image view, the wind, and then we have the text here. So this is pretty easy if you use a set of tools called hstack and stack inside of the tools framework. So what I mean is, first you want to declare these views inside of your cell. So message cell is one of these guys. You just want to say let image view equals some kind of UI view. And I guess I can just use image view here. And what can I do? Let's just use a background color of what have I not used yet? So gray. I'm going to say name label equals UI label. This has a large constructor, which all of these guys come from LBTATools. Makes it a lot easier to create these UI components. So user name, and let's say the font is some kind of bold system font of 16. And I think that's all I want to do for now. Let the message label, so message label equals the UI label, and text here. Let's say the text is going to be, hey girl, what's up there? Let's go out and have a drink tonight. Whatever your pickup line is going to be for this particular application, just type that in there. That's just dummy text for now. This, I'm going to use system size font, let's say 14. Text color is gray. And I don't really care about this stuff. So number of lines, I'll just say 2, and the text alignment is going to default to the left side. So in other words, we've established our 3 UI elements. So message cell, I'm going to lay out these components to kind of look like this. It's not going to be perfect, but basically inside of set of views is a function that we can override and say super.setupViews here. The whole point of this function is to avoid the init override, which is really painful and tedious to type out. So all that we're going to do in setup views is to lay out these guys, which is going to be pretty easy with hstack. So hstack and also the vstack. So let me just show you what hstack is going to do. I'm going to say image view and name label just for now. And let's see if this horizontal stack will give us what we need. So as you can see, our image view in the gray here is taking up all this left space, and the username is on the right of it. And this guy is pretty much a horizontal stack of this component here and this component here, and we have a vertical stack here. So I'll show you how to build this out one step at a time. First thing we need to do is to make sure the image view in the gray is a lot skinnier and a lot shorter. So what I mean is, for the image view, you can do something like this with width height. So let's type that out of 64. And once I do this, you'll see that the gray is going to shrink to whatever you put inside this value here. So that is 64 pixels wide. And you can try to establish a height as well for 64. But once you do this, the Xcode little IDE here will tell you that the stack view is going to conflict with this height value. So you can't exactly establish 64 because the image view is going to take up the full height of the stack view, which is currently up here and down here. So you can't really do this unless you specify something called an alignment for your stack view. So I'm going to use a center here. And you'll see what exactly this does. The warnings at the bottom will also go away, and you see everything's clear down here. And with those two values, let's see, width, height, and alignment, you'll see that this is exactly what your stack view is going to be rendered out as. Okay, now something else that you can do is to provide some margins inside of this stack view here. So I'm going to say with margins, and if you want to establish something that's uniform across all sides, you can just use all sides for the UI edge inset. This is just a convenience initializer that allows you to push things on the left, top, right, and bottom by 16. And again, this hstack comes from LBTATools. It just makes our lives a lot easier in terms of UI layout. And as you can see, we just typed out 3 lines of code here, and we can just establish all of these views inside of our cell. Now, the last thing you want to do is to make sure that there's some spacing between these 2 elements here. And so spacing is going to be something like 4. And I think I should be okay. Let's say 8 instead. So the signature of this hstack function looks kind of like this. So that's what 8 gives us. Maybe you want to establish 12 as a spacing. So hstack, this is the signature. You just want to provide a bunch of views that you want to stack, and then the spacing and the alignment, just like that. So, hopefully that's not too confusing. Once you use it a couple of times, it does get pretty easy to type out. Last thing I want to do is to stack this message label right underneath the user name, which is this name label here. So you just want to embed a couple of stacks within each other. And this will be the name label and message label. I think I'll need some spacing, but let me just run this quickly here to see what the rendering is going to look like. And that looks okay. I'm going to remove the background color now because I don't exactly need it, right? That was just some dummy code to demonstrate what's going on. So that looks okay. If you want to set the image views layer.corner radius to 64/2, you'll get the rounded effect of the gray there. So, hopefully this stuff is making sense. This is pretty simple. So username, and that looks pretty good. If you want to establish some more spacing between the vertical views, you can say spacing of something like 8. I feel like that space is a little bit too tight for me. And I like to have some space and breathing room between my UI elements. So username, and that's the spacing right here. Okay, so awesome stuff so far. And the last thing I want to show you in this video is how we can, make these cells represent some dynamic objects, right? We don't exactly want to say username. We want to have something different like Win, Water, and Kelly. and the message also looks different per cell. And that's actually pretty easy to do. And if you're used to iOS development, what you typically want to establish here is some kind of model object called a message, or doesn't matter what you call this. But this message model is going to contain 3 properties. Let's say the user profile image name, and then we have the username, and also we have the message text. So let's just make this the text variable for now. So you can declare all of this in one line and just use a colon string like that. And what you want to do with this message is basically, like I was mentioning earlier, this list controller is almost always going to represent a list of repeating cells, I think like 90% of the time. And the list of cells is going to represent this object here. Currently, it's defined as a UI color, but that was just some dummy code. I'm going to replace this with the message class here. And once you do that, you got to make sure that the cell that you provide here also implements the same generic of this here. Otherwise, it doesn't work out. So let's just paste the message there. Okay, I can try to build right now, but a couple of things are not working currently. So let me do the override again. So hit backspace there and say item. And now the item is of message type, and let's say did set here. And let's just use name label dot text equals the item, which is this guy. So that's the item. And let's just say username. The reason why username is available is because item is here, a type message, which is this. It has a property username. Hopefully that's not too confusing. It should be pretty straightforward and simple. Last thing I have to fix is right here. You can see that now that I've replaced the generic here with message, you can try to override items right here. You can see it modified into the message array. And so what I can do now is I can establish the items array equal to these objects instead. So just type init and you get the message initializer to come out. So I'm going to use girl for the user profile image name. The username right here is going to be girly McGriddle. And the text is going to be, let's go to McDonald's and grab a sandwich, girl. And let's see, that should represent my one cell for the list that I have inside of my controller here. So as you can see, Girly McGriddle is now showing up as a username. And all I have to do is I can just repeat this a couple of times. And let's say 1, 2, 3, 4 for the username. All the stuff here is still the same, except for the username. So you see Girly McGriddle, 1, 2, and 3, 4. So that's pretty much how we represent a different message per cell inside of our vertical list. We don't have to deal with the cell for item add. We don't have to set anything whatsoever. The list controller inside of the LBTATools framework handles all that stuff for you. So this makes sure that your view controller files right here is super clean and super slimmed down. If you include all those functions and methods like, register class, number of items, and cell for item add, it makes your controller a little large and a little massive, which is something that I always like to avoid. And this is a good way of doing that. If you want to make this stuff work and look kind of like that, you can just go into your assets. And let's see, somewhere on my computer, I have my assets. So let me just drag in the girl profile. Actually, it was already in there. So let me just remove that. And that should work. We just need to say something like, let's say, go back to our message cell class for whenever the item is set. We can now say image view dot image equals UI image, which is this named item dot name. User profile image name is what it's called. And finally, we want to say, let's see, message label dot text equals item dot text, or whatever property you call up here. Then you just want to set it right here. Whenever the list controller is rendered out, it's going to set all of these objects like so. And let's see, image view is looking a little weird. So if you want to fix the image view dot content mode equals scale aspect fill, that'll make sure the image shows up correctly. And you also want to say image view dot clips to bounds equals true. And while I'm here, why don't I just say layer.border width equals 0.5, just to make it a little better. That's going to make our image round and also have a border around it. It's very slight, but hopefully you can see it right there. Okay, so if you want to now modify your model objects to have different text, like let's say this one right here, I hear Wendy's is a better fast food chain. And here, let's see, no, it's not. So these are all just different messages inside of the controller. Let's see what that looks like right here. So message 1, 2, and 3. Something else that you can do, and you can see it's missing a horizontal line separator here, which is right here, right? So there's a horizontal line, and I noticed that the horizontal line is pretty much visible in almost all applications. So inside of these list cells, you can do something like this. So add separator view with the leading anchor. So the separator view, the leading anchor is pretty much where you want to have the separator view stop on the left edge here. So I'm just going to simply say name label dot leading anchor. And once you run this, you'll see the horizontal separator show up. And there's a lot of different ways of doing this, but I find this is the most convenient way. And you'll see the horizontal line right there. The spacing is not perfect, but you can modify that inside of your message controller. But all in all, you can see this is very simple to set up. This is your model object. Typically, you would want to move this inside of a model group. And over here, we are going to have a views group as well. So, go through the typical process of creating your model files. Message and dump that file or dump this code inside of that message file like that. And you want to do the same thing for the view controller for message cell. Just move this inside of the views directory. And you should have a pretty slimmed down project in terms of your UI code. Now, one final thing that I would like to discuss about this LBTAListController component is that there are some minor flaws, and one big flaw is that it doesn't support every use case under the sun. So for example, if you have a list that contains multiple sections or multiple cell types, then the ListController can't actually build out that screen. So that's the limitation there. And the reason why you cannot build that screen is because we only have one items array right here, and there's no easy way to represent multiple sections inside of this list. And there's also only one cell type that you can render out. So keep that in mind when you're using this component. If you need multiple sections and multiple cell types, go for the regular UI collection view controller. Okay, so that's pretty much it for today's video. In the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to render out the header up here that contains yet another UI collection view that you can swipe left and right. And again, we'll be using the LBTA framework to make this implementation super simple. So if you want to check that out, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye guys.